At least 20 people have been killed, including 2 Afghan journalists, after twin blasts at a Kabul wrestling club that left 70 wounded. An hour after a suicide bomber blew himself up inside the sports hall in a heavily Shiite neighborhood. A car packed with explosives detonated as journalists and security forces gathered at the scene. At least 4 journalists have been wounded in the second explosion. Civilians and members of the security forces also are among the dead and wounded. Protesters set fire to the main government building in the southern Iraqi city of Basra amid growing unrest over poor basic services. Demonstrators also blocked the road from the oil hub of Basra to Baghdad to express anger over the electricity outages, unemployment and entrenched corruption in the long-neglected south, which is Iraq's Shiite heartland. Civilians in Idlib are preparing shelters and stockpiling food ahead of an expected all-out Syrian government offensive that could deal a final blow to the 7-year-long uprising. Residents are fearing a possible chemical attack and are making face masks to protect themselves and their children. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad has masked his army and allied forces on the front lines in the northwest, with Russian planes joining his bombardment of rebels. They're in a prelude to a possible assault. Turkey on Wednesday said Russia's air assault on Syria's rebel-held province of Idlib is wrong and the Ankara would try to stop further attacks. Turkey, which backs rebels fighting against Assad, has held several rounds of talks with Russia aimed at averting an assault on Idlib. Turkey says the regime of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad wanted to take control of the province and use the presence of jihadist groups as a pretext. A major airport that was cut off when a huge typhoon smashed through its sole access road was evacuated as Japan grappled with devastation caused by its most powerful storm in a quarter of a century. Boats and buses ferried stranded passengers from Kansai International Airport after thousands of people were forced to spend the night in a partially flooded facility. Tropical storm Gordon weakened after making landfall just west of the Alabama-Mississippi border and lashing the U.S. Gulf Coast with high winds and heavy rain. Gordon was about 40 miles west of Mobile, Alabama, and was packing maximum sustained wind of 70 miles per hour. Hurricane and storm surge warnings and watches were in effect across the region. Top executives from Facebook and Twitter defended their companies in the U.S. Congress over what lawmakers see as a failure to combat continuing foreign efforts to influence U.S. politics. Facebook Chief Operating Officer Sheryl Sandberg, who testified alongside Twitter Chief Executive Jack Dorsey, acknowledged to the Senate Intelligence Committee that the company was too slow to respond to Russian efforts to interfere in the 2016 U.S. election and general American political discourse, but insisted it is doing better. U.S. President Donald Trump has called the latest book by famed Watergate reporter Bob Woodward a work of fiction, saying several members of his administration were insulted by the statements. The book, titled Fear, portrays Trump as prone to profane outbursts and impulsive decision-making. Reacting to claims in Woodward's book, President Donald Trump said he did not discuss assassination of Syrian leader Bashar al-Assad in excerpts. Released in an English daily, Woodward has written that the US president had wanted to assassinate Assad last year after the chemical weapons attack in Syria. President Donald Trump's Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh underscored the importance of judicial independence during the second day of his U.S. Senate confirmation hearing, calling the 1973 ruling legalizing abortion an important legal precedent that has been reaffirmed over the years. Kavanaugh sidestepped a question about whether a sitting president can be required to respond to a subpoena, a query that comes into play as special counsel Robert Mueller investigates potential collusion between Trump's 2016 presidential campaign and Russia. Canada insisted there is still room to salvage the North American Free Trade Agreement as it is officials met U.S. negotiators for a second round of talks. President Donald Trump has warned that Canada would be the loser from any failure to strike a deal and said that over the next day or two we will see what happens. The U.S. called on Nicaragua to release all detained students and political prisoners, declaring the country's 5 months of civil unrest a threat to region security. More than 300 people have been killed and 2,000 injured in crackdowns by Nicaraguan police and armed groups in protests that began in April over an abortive plan by leftist President Daniel Ortega's government to reduce welfare benefits. Amazon.com founder and chief executive Jeff Bezos has entered the American political arena with a $10 million contribution to a non-partisan campaign fund dedicated to electing military veterans to Congress. Bezos, along with his wife Mackenzie, made the donation to the one-year-old Super PAC as Americans prepare to vote in November 6 congressional elections that are seen as a referendum on President Donald Trump. Britain will brief the UN Security Council on the arrest warrants it had issued for 2 Russian spies charged with carrying out a nerve agent attack on British soil. British Ambassador Karen Pierce will present the latest findings on the poisoning of Russian former double agent Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia in the city of Salisbury. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu ordered the closure of Israel's embassy in Paraguay on Wednesday, hours after the Latin American nation's new government announced it would move its embassy back to Tel Aviv from Jerusalem. Paraguay's decision comes as a blow to Israel's efforts to achieve external recognition of Jerusalem as its capital, which appear to have gained some traction this year, with the United States, Guatemala and Paraguay opening embassies over there. South Korean envoy met with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un in Pyongyang to prepare for a third inter-Korean summit later this month, with hopes of putting momentum back into stalled talks between the North and the U.S. on denuclearization. South Korean President Moon Jae-in's special envoys were led by the National Security Chief, and the delegation included Director of the National Intelligence Service, Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte arrived at Amman as part of his 3-day visit to the kingdom. This comes after Duterte's visit to Israel, where he signed an agreement promoting foreign investments between the two countries. Duterte will be meeting with Jordan's King Abdullah, who has donated 2 Cobra helicopters to the Philippine military. The two leaders are expected to witness the signing of agreements on defense, foreign affairs, trade and labor. Dozens of people gathered outside the former Argentine Health Ministry protesting against the recent announcement to demote the institution to a secretariat as part of emergency measures detailed earlier this week by President Mauricio Macri. The Health Ministry is all set to take over by the Ministry of Social Development. Under the measures announced on Monday, the 12 of Argentina's ministries will be shut or merged, blocking transit on the 9 de Julio Avenue that runs adjacent to the ex-Health Ministry building. Demonstrators said that it is a clear message that austerity is targeting the most vulnerable. German administration court has ruled that Frankfurt must ban high-pollution older diesel vehicles from parts of the city from next February as part of a plan to improve air quality. Decision by the court on a case brought by Environment Group came after a landmark ruling by Germany's top administration court in February opened the door to inner-city bans. The latest diesel vehicles manufactured in Germany will meet new emission standards, but the majority of diesel cars on German roads are older. Thousands of protesters took to the streets of La Paz in opposition to the government of Bolivian President Evo Morales. The majority of the protesters were affiliated with groups of coca growers from the Yungas region in the hills and jungles on the eastern slopes of the Andes, who claim the government's coca eradication efforts have hurt their livelihood and led to the death of two of their members. U.S. Defense Secretary Mike Pompeo met with new Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan on the visit to Islamabad for talks. Now, after the meeting, Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said that the U.S. did not ask Pakistan to do more against terror. On the other hand, the U.S. says that Pakistan has been asked to take decisive action against terrorists. U.S. also says agreements with Pakistan have not worked in the past. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo arrived in India on Wednesday night. Pompeo is expected to finalize defense pacts that could bring the two countries' militaries closer amid growing Chinese influence across Asia. India is likely to give its approval to a landmark military communications agreement with the United States during high-level talks on Thursday. The two Indian government defense sources said laying the ground for Washington to sell sensitive defense equipment. Pompeo and U.S. Defense Secretary Jim Mattis will meet their Indian counterparts in talks billed as a 2+2 dialogue. Indian Finance Minister Arun Jaitley attributed the fall in rupee to global factors, stressing that the domestic unit was better off as compared to other currencies. Rupee's unabated fall continued for the sixth straight session on Wednesday as it hit another closing low of 71.75 against the US dollar. Two people were killed and at least 20 were missing after a country-made boat fitted with an engine carrying about 33 passengers capsized in Brahmaputra River. The boat developed a technical snag, following which it collided with an under-construction water supply project near the Aswala Antak Temple Ghat in India's northeastern state of Assam. And National Disaster Response Forces teams were pressed into service to rescue the passengers. Britain's Prince Charles, along with actress and anti-harassment activist Rose McGowan, were among those honoured at the annual GQ Men of the Year Awards. GQ had previously announced actress McGowan, an outspoken advocate on behalf of as the first female recipient of its Inspiration Award, saying her openness about her experience has been one of the driving forces behind the #MeToo movement against sexual harassment. WION was one of the first of the more than 70 women to accuse Hollywood film producer Harvey Weinstein of sexual misconduct. Jurassic Park and Independence Day actor Jeff Goldblum surprised commuters at London's St. Pancras International train station by performing music from his forthcoming jazz album on a public piano. The album is set to be released in November. Crowds gathered around the 65-year-old actor who recorded the Capitol studio sessions with his band, the Mildred Snitzer Orchestra, and applauded his solo performance. Prosecutors in the sexual assault case against Hollywood comedian Bill Cosby are asking a judge to allow testimony at his sentencing hearing about uncharged criminal conduct. In a filing, Montgomery Court prosecutor has asked permission to present multiple witnesses who say Cosby drugged and sexually assaulted them. A spokesman for the 81-year-old comedian says he has no comment on the filing. British royal Meghan Markle has been named People's Magazine's Best Dressed Star of 2018. The American actress who married Prince Harry in May toppled the poll ahead of A-listers including Kim Kardashian, West, Kate Blanchett, Lupita Nyong'o and Amal Clooney. The former star of Suits, who became the Duchess of Sussex upon marrying, has had an undoubted influence on the fashion industry and is praised for her Markle sparkle.